The distributive property is one of my favorite things to teach actually in Algebra 1. I think it's kind of fun to, again, pretend that these terms are more like people. So, for example, in our first case here, we have an x and we have a positive 3. Two terms inside the parentheses, but I prefer to think of it as two people inside a club because the parentheses kind of make it like a club. 8 is outside the club, but he wants to come inside the club because he's leaning on the door of the club. And consequently, when he comes inside, he's going to multiply by the 8, and he's going to multiply by the positive 3. 8 times x gives us 8x. 8 times positive 3 gives us positive 24. It's kind of a silly little way to remember it, but it usually works pretty well. On our next example, again, we have 5x inside the club, inside the parentheses, and negative 7 inside the parentheses. We have an entire term of 2x outside. They go together. They would like to distribute into the parentheses. So the 2x multiplies by 5x to get 10x squared. 2x times negative 7 gives me negative 14x. And it can work with more than just two terms inside the club or inside the parentheses. Here we have x squared. I'm going to stop highlighting because I got to an operation symbol, a plus sign. Positive 4x, negative 2. I strongly recommend using colors or at least underlining or putting the terms in boxes, especially when you're first starting with this concept, because it really helps to keep things organized and then you won't forget to distribute to a term. It helps you to easily see that there are 3 terms in this expression because I've used 3 colors. When I take negative 3 times x squared, I get negative 3x squared. When I take negative 3 times 4x, I get negative 12x. When I do negative 3 times negative 2, remember a negative times a negative is a positive 6. Let's practice a few examples. In example 4, we have a 2 outside the parentheses or a 2 outside the club, and it needs to distribute inside the parentheses. Again, how many terms are there? We have a half x and we have a negative 4. And when the 2 distributes, it multiplies by each term in the parentheses. 2 times 1/2 is simply 1x. 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. I'm going to bring down the plus 6, and it equals 16. From here I could solve if it was asking me to. But since it's not, we're just going to leave it at this. But I will encourage you to stop writing 1x when it's just 1x. Instead, just write the letter x. You don't need a 1 before it. Because remember, when nothing is there, we understand that there's actually a 1. And it just makes things look a little simpler when you don't have all these unnecessary 1s before your coefficient, before your variable of x. Here we have two clubs or two parentheses. In the first parentheses, I have an X. I have a positive 1. In the second parentheses, I have an X. And I have a negative 2. And you might say, well, how do I know which parenthesis this 3 wants to go to? Well, again, think of it. Which club is 3 closest to? It's practically touching this second club here, this green and pink club, this second set of parentheses. So this positive 3 is going to distribute into the second set of parentheses. 2 is going to distribute to the first parentheses. 2 times x is 2x. 2 times 1 is 2. 3 times x is 3x. But I can't just write 3x here. I have to write positive 3x. Positive 3 times negative 2 is negative 6 equals 11. Example 3 is really challenging because we have parentheses, but it doesn't look like we need to distribute anything. Many people try to distribute the 10x, but that's not allowed. The 10x is not touching the club door. It's not touching this parentheses. It's just sitting outside here. And this negative is actually touching the door. What number is it when we can't see any number? It's the number 1. So inside my parentheses, I have a 5x and I have a 4. Outside the parentheses, I have a negative 1 that's going to do the distributing. So 10x comes down. Negative 1 actually distributes, and I have negative 5x. Negative 1 times 4 is negative 4. So that's a very tricky situation that you have to be looking for. Don't try to distribute the 10x. You distribute the number, or in some cases variable or term, that's touching the parentheses. And that is all of the examples we're going to do today, because I don't want your video to get too exceedingly long, and we still want to talk a little bit about combining like terms.